Twitter is what LinkedIn should have been, right? What I mean by that, like, that's a nuance, but what I mean by that is if you treat Twitter the way people treat LinkedIn, where it's like, hey, I'm here for my job interview, right? Everyone's like, dude, get out of here, kick rocks. Or like, nobody cares. Nobody's going to follow you. Like, you're a loser. But if people treat Twitter like what LinkedIn should have been, which is, hey, this is me. This is what I care about. Here's the ideas. Here's the content I consume. Hey, this is when I joke around. I love, the New York Giants. They suck, but I still love them, right? The Knicks, we don't even, want to claim them anymore. But hey, I still am a Knicks fan, right? All these little things that people are like, yo, you know what? I'm a Giants fan too. And I like artificial intelligence. And man, I saw that meme you posted. That was hilarious, right? Now I get to know you as a person. And it's like this digital storefront for you. And so it's naturally going to attract a lot of people that want to be friends with you.
Pomp, welcome to the show, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Dude, I've been following what you're doing, man. You're a savage, as you just called our mutual connection before. Like, you've been crushing it this year with your podcast, YouTube, your emails. You're still all over social media. You're investing. You're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So I guess before we even get into the details, could you just give a high-level overview of what you're working on today?
So I spend most of my time investing, still do a lot of early stage venture investing. Then I've got one of the top 10 tech podcasts in the world. I write a daily email to 75,000 investors or so. And we got YouTube, all that kind of stuff. And then just today, actually, we announced that we're launching a second podcast. And doing that with Bryce Hall, who's for people my age, they don't know who that is, but Bryce Hall is one of the most popular TikTok and social media stars in the world right now. And so going to go and try to educate people in terms of financial education with that podcast. Yeah,
because I saw last night you were tweeting about a collaboration. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about.
That's exactly what I was talking about.
That's it. All right.
It's pretty crazy. I don't think people were ready for that.
Yeah, I saw people saying it was Meek Mill, and you were like, no, but let's get Meek Mill involved. There's all sorts of... in a couple months, maybe. Some of the numbers I'd just love to call out for people who aren't familiar with your work. You've got almost 400,000 people following you on Twitter. You mentioned 75,000 people on your Substack email, which is great, POMPLIANO.com. And I saw you tweet this in the past that you're estimated to have 25 million podcast listens this year. I don't know if that's gone up or down, but either way, crazy amount. Like, people who follow podcasting know that's in the top 1%, if not even 0.1% or something like that. What we're going to focus on today is really about growing an audience from scratch. And I think, there's many things we could have talked about, but I wanted to hone in on one particular thing. If you were starting again today and you were just Pomp coming out of the army like you have in the past, you worked at Facebook and Snap, and now you land and you say, okay, I want to switch stuff up. And I've heard you talk about having an audience is the new currency. So first of all, I guess, like, what do you mean by that? And why is it so important for people to have an audience?
Yeah, I think having an audience has always been important, right? It's one of those things where, like, whether you were a celebrity, you were a sports star, whether you were a business with a large customer base, just that is the whole idea of kind of commerce, right? Is being able to take an idea, a product, a service, and put it in front of people and serve them with some level of value. And so that's not kind of a new idea. But I think that what is new is taking that concept and now giving the tools to kind of everyday people. Right? Look, I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a movie star. I'm not an actor, right? As much as I like to tell my parents I should have been, I'm not an athlete. I'm not kind of all these different things. And so when you look at that, it's like, okay, well, how can somebody amass a big audience, right? It's because there's new tools available to us. And so whether that's things like Facebook and Twitter and kind of the traditional social media platforms, whether that's things like email, where I now can have a direct relationship with that audience, or it's things like YouTube that allow for much more kind of multimedia type content, or Instagram Instagram, things like that. You just got to understand kind of how all of these tools work and what each one of them provides from an opportunity set kind of for people today. And then the idea is if you can build a really, really big audience, it's building a business in reverse, right? So usually people used to build products and then go find the customers. Now what you're doing is you're going and finding your customers first, and then you figure out, okay, what are all the products that we can build to sell to these people and help them solve their problems, right? And so this idea of kind of flipping the company building sequence on its head, I think is really powerful. And so that's what I've been focused on.
And what made you realize that? I guess it was just like seeing what else was going out there, because some people are listening to this and they've just watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix or whatever it was, and they're saying, okay, cool, I get it. Like there isn't a new concept, like you said. At the same time, there are plenty of people building really impressive businesses without having an audience from day one. So I guess from the counter side, what would you say to someone thinking from that point of view?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not for everybody, right? Everyone's got to kind of do what they are most comfortable doing. And so there's a lot of hard work that goes into this. I tell people all the time that, my best piece of advice is don't even start, because it's a nightmare, right? I mean, there's days where I'm literally working 12, 14 hours. People don't see that, though. They just see like, wait, there's a podcast that comes out every day. There's an email that comes out every day. There's a daily YouTube show, right? There's all these tweets. Like, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it. And so unless you're really committed and you really enjoy doing this stuff and you're ready to kind of roll and do it for 5 years, just don't even start. But those who that's attractive and want to go do it, it's then just understanding, okay, what's my strategy, kind of have the dedication to consistency, and then it's just time, right? It's just keep doing it day in, day out, and eventually you'll find success.
Yeah, it's the unsexy answer people don't want to hear, but is obviously the truth. We'll definitely get into some of the structure, processes, and maybe even tools that you use or people that you've hired to help along the way as well later down in the conversation. But I guess just starting up, there's a concept of, in business in general, obviously, picking a niche, right? Like picking who you want to serve, a type of person. I think when you started, is that something you had in mind, or were you going broad and you were just, because I think you started on Twitter really, right? That was your first channel that you went after.
Correct. Yeah, I basically went really hard at Twitter right out of the gate. And the thought process was that was the platform where it took the least amount of effort to create content. 2, it had the most virality kind of engineered into the algorithm. And 3 was it gave me kind of the feedback loop. And so I had a leg up in just that I'd worked at Facebook and was very kind of aware of how some of the algorithms work at these social media companies. But Twitter was where I started. And then I did it for about 18 months. I literally just went hard at Twitter until I launched the email about 18 months later. And again, it takes discipline and kind of consistency to do something for 18 months before you jump to the next thing. But I can't say I had a master plan, but it's just like that's when it felt right to do. And so that's what I did.
Like I've heard you talk about choosing one channel at a time. And this is if you're kind of studying content and you look at what you talk about one channel at a time, which I actually agree with now. And then you've got someone else on the other end who's like Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, who I wouldn't say he would completely disagree with that, but his approach, he's got this Gary V content model, you've probably seen it, and he's all about like 200 pieces of content, be everywhere, be on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere someone can take in your information. Of course, on his scale now, he's got 20 plus people working on that full time, but he did do it himself early on without all of that help, so I want to give him credit for that as well. But I'm just curious your approach. Like, why have you chosen to go first to Twitter, and then to email, and then to podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, look, remember Gary started out on one platform too, right? When Gary started, it was basically YouTube, and there was like really nothing else available. I mean, there was kind of Facebook, but not really, right? And so I think that yes, you can get to the point where you're everywhere, right? And now I've got kind of 4 or 5 platforms and kind of really spending a lot of time on it. But in the beginning, it's just you got to kind of learn to walk before you run. And so I tell people all the time that like if you're not even sure you can consistently produce content on Twitter, then you're definitely not ready to be on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, podcast, YouTube. Like, no way. And so what is the easiest thing for you to do? Are you you like to write? Okay, do email first, right? Oh, is Twitter easy for you? Do you spend a lot of time there anyways? Okay, start there, right? Just pick your platform, start. And then if you find success, what's going to happen is you're going to build an audience. And the reason to go sequentially is because you put all your time, energy, and focus into one platform, you grow it. And then once you hit kind of a critical mass, when you start the second platform, you're going to be able to grow the second platform faster because you got the first platform than you would if you just kind of started trying to grow everything all at once, right? So it's one of these things where by having the patience and picking your spots, you actually make it easier on yourself later to grow each platform, right? Perfect example. I went on YouTube this year from 3,000-4,000 subscribers to over 110,000 already this year in 8-9 months. And people say like, what do you mean you went that fast? Well, it's because I have a massive Twitter following. I've got the email list. I've got the podcast, right? Like all these things that help. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it was going to be successful, but I was able to launch YouTube off this kind of foundation that, of course, gives me an advantage. And so I think that's what people have to remember is just like, if you're playing for a 6-month game, then sure, go everywhere, do whatever you want. But if you're playing the long game, you got to kind of be very sequential about this. And it's not who kind of gets out of the gate the fastest, it's who's got the most robust, engaged audience at the end, right? And if you think of it that way, then it's like go platform by platform is the best strategy.
I think one thing you just mentioned there is the regular cadence. And that's, of course, really important, not just like philosophically in terms of consistency as a person and showing up every day, but actually just for the algorithm as well. Like YouTube rewards you for posting consistently on a regular cadence. So do those other platforms because people engage with you. So I guess let's say someone listening to this agrees with that principle, but now they want to take that into practice. Are there any things that you think are really helping you to make sure you're just committed to this? And you talked about 12-14 hour days, but beyond just the grind, are there things mentally even that you said, okay, I start the day and I wake up and I'm going to do this, I'm going to write my email, which is what I think you do?
Yeah, so I wake up, I usually don't know what I'm going to write about. So first thing I do is I take a shower. For whatever reason, that's like step one, got to wake up. Step two is I got to go get coffee. So I usually walk around the corner to Starbucks. Polina likes to sleep in, so I get her coffee as well, which is a debate in our house. We're going to see if maybe one day she starts waking up earlier and going to get coffee for me. But no, in all seriousness, once I kind of got coffee and everything, I start to write. And usually I'll kind of troll around Twitter, a couple of websites and stuff, look for some ideas. Then I just fire out the email. Can take anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes, kind of get it all structured into the right, kind of format, send that out. Then we record a morning show, or kind of a daily show, I guess, on YouTube, called Lunch Money. It's just Polina and I. We do it in our kitchen. A lot of people, another fallacy is a lot of people want like super high quality production. We don't even use a microphone, right? We don't use any lighting. Like it's just literally the laptop webcam in our kitchen, and we get somebody who edits it. But like other than that, that's pretty much it. And then I basically structure my day around talking to interesting people. So that can be from an investment standpoint. I'm talking to founders. It's not recorded. It's just me learning, looking at potential investments, or it's me talking to investors, founders, other people for the podcast. And so there's days where I'll record, I think the most I've ever recorded in a day was 5 podcast episodes. And then there's days where I'll record 0, right? And so it's really just kind of what the schedule will allow and kind of where I am from a cadence standpoint. Right now I've got a week and a half of content up on the podcast. I'm not kind of dying to go record a bunch of podcasts, but I got a week and a half of content pre-recorded because last week I spent 2 days straight recording 4 episodes each day. Right. So it's like you kind of learn the cadence and you kind of speed up and slow down based on that. And then I'm really bad at email. I'm really bad at texting. I'm pretty much the most active on Twitter DM, which is ridiculous. And so I've been getting in a habit of at the end of the day, usually around 8 p.m., I sit down and I start trying to knock out my email. And it's almost like a game. Like, can I get to not inbox 0 because I got like 1,500, 1,600 emails in there, but can I just get through the ones I got today, right? And I don't get to them all the time, but just can I really try to be as responsive as possible to people, and kind of let them all stack up all day and they go knock them out, go to sleep and do it again the next day. And it's a pretty monotonous, repeatable process if that's what you enjoy doing, right?
Yeah, so anyone who's trying to cold email you 8 p.m., 8:07, you've settled in, you're looking at the inbox and you're like, damn, who's this? Bilal's trying to get me on his show. Right, so I won't take offense if I need to bump you a couple of times. It's cool. But So that's great. And I think that was actually, I wasn't even planning to ask you necessarily your routine, but I think that's really helpful just to kind of visualize, like, okay, you're just doing normal stuff that everyone does, but you've got some structure. And if I was Tim Ferriss, I'd probably say you've got a morning routine, and you go and get your coffee, and maybe you're thinking about stuff, and in the shower you're meditating or whatever. But in reality, it's just something that works for you. You've got a routine and you keep banging it out. So I think that's really important to cover either way. Let's get more into the actionable side of things. So let's talk about Twitter first of all, because it was your first kind of domino in this whole kind of empire you're building. But let's say you were starting again today, someone's listening, and they say, how do I get to my first 1,000 or 5,000 followers? Are there certain things that have helped you in really doing that, apart from writing 10 tweets a day or whatever else it might be that you do?
Yeah, well, it depends on the platform, right? So if you think about kind of Twitter itself, definitely the things that work are like, one, overwhelm the algorithm, right? So just tweet as much as you possibly can. Literally tweet so much that's uncomfortable. That usually is like, most people want to tweet once, and I tell them like, you should be tweeting sometimes between 10 and 20 times a day. And so obviously you don't have ideas, that many ideas, and it's very uncomfortable for people. So how do you go find ideas? What I did was I went to news sites and I basically found a bunch of these articles. And then I would just tweet the ideas that were in the articles, right? And that was super valuable. Gave me great content. The second thing was that I basically then would reply to people, right? So I really, really wanted to make sure that like my content was being found in the feeds of other people. So let's say that somebody who's got a big audience tweets, that tweet's going viral. I immediately would reply, because it's almost like you get attached to their rocket ship, right? And you're going to get all the impressions from it. Another thing I would do is I would go to somebody's page. I would follow them. I would go like a couple of their tweets and respond, right? And what it basically does is you're like engaging with them. They're like, hey, who the hell is this person? They go and they look at your thing, and then they follow you back. And then also, I think another key piece is like being yourself. And that's like a very unmeasurable thing. But so many people treat Twitter like LinkedIn, and they don't realize that Twitter is what LinkedIn should have been, right? What I mean by that, like, that's a nuance, but what I mean by that is if you treat Twitter the way people treat LinkedIn, where it's like, hey, I'm here for my job interview, right? Everyone's like, dude, get out of here, kick rocks. Or like, no, nobody cares. Nobody's going to follow you. Like, you're a loser. But if people treat Twitter like what LinkedIn should have been, which is, hey, this is me. This is what I care about. Here's the ideas. Here's the content I consume. Hey, this is when I joke around. I love, the New York Giants. They suck, but I still love them, right? The Knicks, we don't even, want to claim them anymore. But hey, I still am a Knicks fan, right? All these little things that people are like, yo, you know what? I'm a Giants fan too. And I like artificial intelligence. And man, I saw that meme you posted. That was hilarious, right? Now I get to know you as a person, and it's like this digital storefront for you. And so it's naturally going to attract a lot of people that want to be friends with you, right? And that's how you build a following. It's just, there's a lot of things in there that you could screw up. I tend to think that it's just persistence and testing, and then eventually you find what works and you stick to it.
One other thing I've heard you mention before are that links hurt virality. And so just to say, for both you and I, we share our YouTube or podcast link. Our guests might retweet it or share it natively on their side. I've noticed that even myself. Like, I literally just did a test a few days ago with Kat Cole's interview, and we've got a clip going on LinkedIn, and obviously the algorithm is different on LinkedIn, but that's got up to like 15,000 views of this one little clip we did. And I basically reposted it with links, a very similar clip with links, and it really suppresses the algorithm, I think. I don't know the details of it. Have you noticed that yourself on, let's say, Twitter as well?
Absolutely. And most platforms, right? And it makes sense in terms of, for most platforms, what happens? If you put a link, you're literally taking somebody off their website and bringing them somewhere else. They want to
keep them on there. Yeah.
So like, hey, that's not cool. So like, Twitter's a great example. If you want to upload a video, if it fits within their requirements, it's much better to natively upload it into the tweet than it is to put the YouTube link. Duh, right? Like, I mean, like, when you think of it in hindsight, it's like common sense stuff, but a lot of people just don't think that way, right? In terms of, I'm putting a piece of content on this person's platform. What are the things that they are going to incentivize me to do because it's good for them? time spent, engagement, like all these different things, right? And so I think that's where we really got to educate people. I'm like, hey, here's what works, here's what doesn't. And when it comes to links, that's one. Two is like the other piece is like trying to get engagement. So if you say like retweet, a lot of times they'll actually suppress some of your distribution because you're literally asking for the engagement, right? So there's all kinds of cool little things that you can do in terms of how you word things to try to get the engagement. You can ask questions. You're not saying reply, but you're asking a question so that people reply. Yeah. Like all that type of little stuff. Again, I didn't know any of this, right? I'm learning all this just like everybody else is. I just put in the time, tested a bunch of stuff, figured out what worked, and then doubled down on it.
I noticed the same with these clips that I put out as well. So they're on Twitter, they have to be less than 2 minutes, 20 seconds. I don't even try to, I do put a link to YouTube, but that's really more like a summary of the podcast. But these clips are what get people's attention. And I think the other point of view is you have to think what mindset that person is in. If they're scrolling through Twitter, they're not necessarily looking for an hour and a half podcast to listen to. They're like scrolling through 100 tweets in 1 minute. So you have to think about like what is going to resonate with someone, is going to capture their attention. And and I've now put at the end of the clips, like you can subscribe on watch the full video on YouTube or subscribe to the podcast rather than it being in text, because I'm sure they kind of crawl that and suppress it. So that's definitely really helpful, man. Let's go on to YouTube and podcasting now. So I know YouTube has a different algorithm, and you actually mentioned something there which a lot of people don't actually know, even people that are doing really well on YouTube, is that YouTube is actually optimized primarily on time spent, not necessarily views. And we're in an age where you see a clip with 20 million views, but what you might not realize is, getting someone to listen to an hour Pomp podcast is very different to listening to a 1 minute clip on Twitter. So are there certain things you've done on YouTube that have really helped you, gain the number of subscribers you have?
I have not. I literally just uploaded content, and either people like it or not. I'm actually very unsophisticated when it comes to YouTube. I've learned over time. So like this new podcast with Bryce Hall. Bryce is an expert. Bryce has almost 3 million subscribers on YouTube. Like the guy's an animal, understands it really, really well. A lot of people don't know this as well. He does a lot of the editing himself. So it's him, and he's got some people who help him or whatever. But one of the videos that we uploaded today is a video, and it's like super choppy, right? It's like not a conversation like you and I would have. And so you're like, wow, that's really quote unquote manipulated, right? In terms of it's sped up a little bit, it seems like it's cut up. But what it does is it keeps it high energy, high impact, right? You just can't click away. And then what you're doing is you're drastically increasing the amount of completion rate, right? Or like how many people finish the video. And that's what YouTube looks like. Wow, that must have been great content because they completed it. Bam, we should show this to more people. And that's where the recommendation algorithms take over. And so I think that's the type of stuff that you really want to understand. Now, Bryce, being a young guy who's like built a huge following on that platform, understands it at an expert level. And so I'm getting the crash course on how that works. But I think other people can look at, whether it's Bryce, other TikTokers who are moving to YouTube, other YouTube stars, like what are they doing that works? And if it works, then what I should be doing is the same thing in my own videos, right? And I think that's kind of one of the key lessons that people need to gravitate from or pull away.
Yeah, that's a really good point. How old is Bryce? Is he like early 20s?
20, I think he just turned 21.
See, I love that, man. I love just seeing like I'm probably a similar age to you. I think you're like 32, 33, right?
I am.
Cool. So me too. So one thing I realized is when the Call Her Daddy girls kind of killed it on the podcasting space before the kind of crazy stuff that happened in the summer. And for people that don't know, they kind of like have this crazy podcast that went to like number 2 out of nowhere, and they're part of Barstool. And Barstool is obviously very interesting. I know you just interviewed the founder of that recently as well. But I remember hearing one of them say that, I forgot her name, but the blonde girl, she said that she edits basically all of it herself. And that was surprising because Barstool is a pretty big company by this point. They have professional editors there. But she was editing herself, and I heard her say that she wanted to turn those long form conversations into vlog style choppy bits. And I think that's
the whole
something
key. And remember, the reason why she's doing it herself is because it's an acquired talent and an acquired skill in terms of being able to do that, right? And sure, maybe there are some people who could do it, elsewhere, but a lot of the people who are learning how to do this is a different skill set than kind of traditional video editing. It's editing style for a specific platform. Because if you do that on Twitter, it doesn't really matter as much. Right. Yeah. And so you got to kind of understand, where am I putting the content on what platform? And, again, I sound like an idiot to myself talking about this stuff, because I'm like the least educated when it comes to a lot of the people that have been teaching me about it. But, especially the kind of the TikTok and YouTube crowd, they understand how to make that content work on a platform like YouTube. And you see it just in the results that they're getting in terms of the audiences they've built.
Yeah, man. What about, I was looking at Social Blade. I don't know if you ever used that before, but you can kind of see views and subscribers over time. I saw you had a huge jump in like March, April. Maybe that was when you did this Jam Up interview, maybe, or something like that. And then it kind of flattened out. It's still growing and doing well, obviously. But I'm curious, is that something you've personally felt yourself, or is that not even something you're monitoring properly?
So there's kind of three things that happened. So one is just we got the economic shock. So like when that economic shock happens, everyone they're just paying attention. They want content. Like, what the hell is going on, right?
Yeah.
So that, like, we saw that in 08, 09, like content just goes through the roof in terms of engagement and stuff like that. Two was everyone was locked at home. So it was like everyone was kind of sitting on what do I do? Okay, I'll just play on the internet, right? So like that helped, because although CPMs and everything fell, the amount of content consumption went through the roof. And then the third thing was there was specific episodes, Raul Paul, Chamath, there was a couple of them that really kind of took off. I think during that time there was 2 or 3 episodes that are in our top 10 on YouTube. And so that helps obviously with growth as well. Now, there will be people who debate, like, look, Chamath came on, he nailed it. I mean, he had clear articulation of his ideas. He had really kind of thought-provoking ideas, interesting. They drew a lot of kind of intrigue from people. Some people disagreed. A lot of people agreed, right? So you get kind of the shareability of it, all that. But did they start watching because they're sitting at home during COVID? Did they start watching because they think I'm cool, right? Probably not. Did they think, Chamath was really smart and they just consume all of Chamath's content, right? Like there's all these factors that go into it. And at the end of the day, I kind of take the approach of like, I don't know. What I do know, though, is if I consistently show up every single day and try to improve the product of the conversation, that eventually people will seek out value, they'll find it, and then they'll kind of be along for the ride, and you just get that audience growing and growing and growing over time.
And I think his episode specifically, first of all, one of my favorite, probably one of my top 10 episodes I've listened to, not just on your podcast, but across the board. But I also think it was really timely in a way, because it was, if I remember correctly, the title was something like how to invest right now from a billionaire. And that's great, because it's like, cool. All right. We know we're going into something crazy. There's so many unknowns. Someone like me is saying, okay, I want to first of all be secure, but I also want to be able to make the most of this when I can, or at least protect myself against downside risk. And who else to listen to in this situation for investing than someone who's an expert and actually proven it? So I think that those things definitely combined, and the timing as well. But yeah, I guess since we're on that, and again, it comes from tens of thousands of reps of writing every day. Like that title, for example, is that something you just pop out as soon as you record and you're like, hey, okay, this is the title? Or are you writing like several and sitting there and thinking, oh, which one's going to resonate the most?
So I gotta admit, I never told anybody this before, but there's a secret among my family and my friends, which is my alternative career, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing, would be as a headline writer. For whatever reason, when we get done with videos, they'll say, what should the title be? And the first thing that comes out of my mind is usually what we end up going with. We can come up with a whole bunch of other ideas, but for whatever reason, it's like this innate thing. I've tried to teach people it, can't do it. I've tried to figure out how or where that came from. I have no clue, but just this idea of, I just sat through the conversation. You say to me, like, summarize it in a headline. And it's just whatever I think of, and that's usually what we go with. And that's what happened there was, I think literally the guy who edits for me was like, hey, we need a headline. And I texted him back in like 30 seconds. It was like, billionaire Chamath Palihapitiya on whatever. And he was just like, okay.
Yeah.
So not that much thinking goes into them, unfortunately. Maybe it would be better if we did more thinking.
No. Sometimes instinctively is what works best as well. And I think especially for someone like you who's writing so much and you're getting this constant feedback, right? Like you're seeing what works, and you're even subconsciously you're tweeting tens of thousands of times, people are you're gonna get that feedback. So we'll have to try that near the end of this episode for you to name this one. So we'll test it out as well. I will actually ask. I've got Sam Parr from The Hustle, who I know you know as well, who's coming on in a few days. He is an amazing copywriter. So I think I'll try to take this and build on it with him. And one of the things I've learned from reading his stuff is like the first line is trying to get you to the next line, and then that line's trying to get you to the next line, and he does it in a way that is just, it makes you think and it stands out, and I think you've got the same skill as well. So
look, he's much better than I am at that, so I will I'll learn everything I can from Sam, because he's obviously very good at what he does on that front.
So let's go on to, I know we're getting tactical, but I think this is really helpful for people who are actually building today. So let's talk about podcasts specifically. So you've got YouTube, video and audio, and then you've got audio only podcast. I don't know what your split's like, if it's like 50-50 or majority people listen, or if you even want to share that. But I've found that the discoverability of YouTube is great, and people actually find new content on there. Whereas on the audio side of things, it's actually pretty difficult to do, right? So like 70-80% of audio listens happen on Apple Podcasts still, and Spotify is probably the other 10-20%, and then the random apps after that. So have you found anything to really help with that, apart from asking people to write reviews and stuff like that?
I mean, it's all the classic stuff. Like the hard part is there's no secret to this stuff, right? It's like everyone knows now. Okay, get subscribers, get reviews, get ratings on a podcast, right? On YouTube, get subscribers, get people to watch to the end of the video, get them to leave a comment, get them to subscribe, get them to hit the thumbs up on the YouTube video, on an email, get them to forward it, get them to tell their friends, right? Get them to subscribe to the email thread on Twitter, get them to engage, like. You just go down to each platform, and if you ask anyone who's like, I call like internet savvy, like, hey, how do you grow this? Like, put out high quality content consistently, and then do the basics. And if you do those three things, then like you can win, right?
I'm curious, like even I'm looking at some of the stuff I did to research this. You talked about like transcripts, for example, for SEO. Like, have you actually seen much of an increase in traffic using transcripts on your interviews?
So we don't do them anymore, mainly just because we crank out 5 episodes a week, and they're just too hard to do that often. It's pretty long turnaround time, and so we don't do them. Definitely, there are people who do. I think Patrick O'Shaughnessy is doing a fantastic job with Invest Like the Best. He's been doing these kind of transcripts. I think he puts his episodes out on Tuesday, and then on Sunday he puts out the transcript for like the week prior, and they're just very well done. They're high quality. And so I generally think that, like, again, high quality content does really well when positioned consistently. Now, what is high quality? It's a whole nother question, right? Like, to different people, that's different things. And also, like, I always say, like, there's a completeness and then there's like a perfection. And I think everyone shoots for perfection. What I think about is like, can we hit completion? Because if we hit completion, then we're going to be ready to rock and roll.
Well, that's really helpful on those different channels. Again, I think we could talk just for 2 hours about one of those. So I wanted to get some themes and some actionable tips. Let's move on to kind of like your process and systems. We kind of touched on it earlier on, where you talked about your daily kind of like what that looks like. But I'd love to actually just go into the podcast specifically, selfishly, see if I can borrow some ideas. You publish five a week, so I'd love to understand, like, what does it look like from booking and scheduling guests to recording and editing to posting on channels and promoting? If you could just walk through that.
Yeah, so booking wise, we are very unsophisticated. I literally just DM people on Twitter and say, hey, you want to come on the podcast? And I try to gauge, like, do they know about the podcast, or do I have to start with like, hey, I have a podcast. That podcast is like pretty big. Here's recent guests. Like, you should come on. It takes 90 minutes, right? Like all that type of stuff. And so some people it's literally just want to come on next week, ? And then other times it's kind of a more formal pitch, if you will. Twitter DM is by far the best one because people they check it. Usually they don't have a team that does that, so you can get right to the person. I will email every once in a while, but for the most part, Twitter DM. Then from a scheduling standpoint, I do all my own scheduling. I'm very fanatical about not letting anyone have control of my calendar, just for probably just control and weirdo perspective, but just I don't want anyone to have that control. And then when we go get on, I use Zoom now because we're doing everything remote. I try to technically get them set up, make sure they have a microphone, maybe some headphones, all that kind of stuff. But I've had guests that come on and literally have music playing in the background. There's one person who literally was sitting 50 feet away from the computer, it looked like, and they were like in a hotel room. It's like, come on. So we do the best we can, obviously, with the remote recording, because we just don't have full control like we used to have kind of in studio on the audio and video quality. And then we record. During the recording, people may notice I write a lot of stuff down. So I'm literally taking notes while we're recording. I'm writing down start times, end times. If there's any issues with the recording, I'm doing all that to make it easier on the editor. And then once I get done, I've locally recorded everything. I go ahead and I put it on email, send it off with kind of all of the context that they need in terms of, here's the start times, end times, here's the title, all of that. And then they basically do all the magic. I got a guy, Joe Clokus, who does a fantastic job with it. And then basically it'll all get uploaded and scheduled out for whenever we're going to post it. But here's the secret. It's all managed in like Google Drive on sheets and docs, right? There's some emails, and we use Zoom, and like I got a microphone and some headphones. Like my headphones literally came from American Airlines. I think I took them off a plane by accident, right? Like this is not, this is not a sophisticated operation. Like I think people think it takes a lot to get started. But again, it's just get people on, have good conversations, put it out in front of people, do the basics, and you can grow an audience as well. Just the last part there. So they edit, and are they responsible for publishing it, putting it into your audio host, all that sort of stuff? They are. And YouTube as well. Yep. Cool. That used to not be the case, but now that's what we do. And then the last thing is promotion. So on launch day, let's say, you're putting out an episode, like, is that literally just you going to Twitter and writing your post, or do you schedule things out? Do you batch them? Like, I'm just curious how that what's the saying? Well. Trigger fingers turn to Twitter fingers, right? That's exactly what happens. I go on Twitter and I just start firing off tweets. And then I copy and paste the tweet right before I post it. I put it on LinkedIn. And then I'll also put it in the email. So I'll put kind of a link to the email, in the email saying, hey, here's today's guest. Here's what we talked about. Go listen to it. But, it's trying to use the other platforms to kind of drive traffic. But ultimately, I've noticed that even if I don't promote it, for the most part, we'll get like 90% of the downloads anyways. So I'm probably just wasting my time a little bit with some of the episodes by tweeting it and stuff like that. Because it's really just like who is subscribed on that platform or who's on YouTube. So we're still kind of promoting it. It's just it may not be as effective as we once thought. I'm the same, man. Like we record for an hour and a half, 2 hours. I used to do all the editing. Now I have an editor as well. But I am still quite involved. Like I like to know like if there's parts that I really want to take out, I'm similar to you. But we try to just keep it all in as is. And then there's the clips that I cut up as well, which really help for getting stuff out. But that is quite a lot of work as well, because you're trying to shorten it down to 2 minutes and stuff like that. So, but I think ultimately it's all about, like you said, like picking something you want to keep doing, sticking to it, and putting out on a regular schedule is the main thing. That's it, man. That's the magic. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. Yeah. We're going to transition, switch gears a little bit here. You're really at the forefront of like what I guess people call new media, right? Like you've got Substack, YouTube, podcasts, all that stuff. One of the kind of concepts that I've brought up a few times with people like yourself is this idea of platform risk. And, you now are spread out across many channels. Is that something you've purposely done, not just to grow your audience, but because you're worried about like if Twitter changes algorithm or something like that? I'm curious how you thought about it. I don't think I've ever told this to anybody outside of my little circle, but that's why I started the email. Really? Okay. I was not worried, but just like having worked at Facebook, I saw small businesses that had built their entire business on Facebook, and then as their kind of distribution went away, it was just really painful. And even like the gaming companies and stuff like that had built on Facebook. And so there was no like one day where I was like, oh my God, like Twitter could take away my stuff or take away the distribution. But it was more of just understanding like, hey, I probably should have a different platform. And so if you think of emails, like the exact opposite of Twitter, there's no algorithm, there's no anything really, other than like spam filters. And so I said, this is the kind of most direct relationship that I can have with the audience. And so I basically started it really under that guise. And then once that started to get built up, I was like, oh, this is, a way to grow the audience as well. But the original idea was to kind of de-risk the platform risk than more so than anything else.
Yeah, I thought you'd have a unique kind of, I thought you would have at least thought about having worked at both of those companies. So it's something that I've been conscious of as well, especially like you just talked about Facebook there. And for people who don't know the numbers, like if you had 1 million people following you on Facebook, that doesn't mean 1 million people see your post, obviously, right? And it's a percentage, it's something called organic reach. And now on Facebook, that's gone all the way down below 5%, like even 1 to 2% sometimes. So if you've got 1 million people, only 1% of them might see your stuff. On Instagram, it's like 5 to 15, depending on how good your content is, essentially. One of my friends, I can't say the company name, but it's one of the top sports brands in the world. You'd probably guess it in 1 or 2 guesses. They don't even post like organically on Facebook anymore. They just run ads because there's basically no point. It's like the time and effort it takes to create that organic post. They just rather run ads, which is still really effective. But I think just it's a really smart thing to do if someone's listening to this and they're trying to grow YouTube, they're trying to grow on social media. They're basically like rented platforms. Eventually, you kind of need to essentially pay to reach more people. And on email, that's not the case. So that's cool to see, man. As we talk about email, you've got a Substack. You were one of the first people on Substack, I think. So I'd love to hear your opinion on like how things are going to evolve, in your opinion, when it comes to monetization, because there's these new subscription models. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. Subscription models been around, but for email specifically, there's been a rise in premium subscriptions. We're seeing the same happen with podcasts as well, with stuff like Patreon and a few other players. So I'm curious how you see you monetizing your different media channels in the future. Have you considered doing like a paid only podcast, for example? Is that something you would consider?
From a creator standpoint or kind of like the host standpoint, that would be amazing. I just don't know if consumers are ready for that in kind of a broad scale. And there's also non-economic benefits to having kind of a free, wide-reaching podcast, right? So you're trying to balance basically monetization with reach. And the holy grail would be to have incredible reach and also be able to monetize at a compelling level. But it's just hard to do both, right? And that's kind of the paradox. And so I think what you end up seeing is people will optimize for the reach and then they'll kind of monetize along the way. And that's basically what I've done. But I've looked a lot at kind of paid podcasts or subscription podcasts, things like could you do an extra episode? Could you put some episodes behind the paywall? Could you do extra content, Q&As, all that kind of stuff? I haven't found the right model, so I just kind of kept it how I have it right now. But I do believe that there's going to be some pretty valuable stuff as we kind of move forward.
Well, listen, we've got about 20 minutes left, so we're going to switch gears again. Thanks for sharing all that on the audience side. I think there's a lot of tangible things people can apply to their own work. This section is called Behind the Mind. We're just going to talk about random stuff that I wanted to ask you about. But specifically, I think we can kick it off around investing. I know that's kind of where your bread and butter is. You invest in startups. You've been investing for some time. Like, what's your approach to investing right now? I've even seen you've started investing in digital art, for example, and you're partnering with other brands, building companies. Like, how do you think about investing?
Yeah, I pretty much what I'm looking for is I'm looking for 3 things, right? I'm looking for great founders. So I really, really focus on the people that I'm investing in. I tend to think that everything around them is going to change, everything from the product, the competition, the market dynamics, all that will change. But if you have the right kind of captain of the ship, they'll navigate, the stormy seas, if you will, in a very kind of weird example. Also, I think a lot about like how big is the market. So early on, I was like, oh, that's a good idea, and I would invest. Now I really focus on like, how big is this opportunity, right? Is this a $1 billion company possibly? Okay, that's interesting. Is this a 10 billion, 50 billion, 200 billion? Could this be a $1 trillion company? Right? Like, how big is this market opportunity? And so I think that's a pretty big input. And then the third thing is just like, am I excited about this? Right? Like, I'm gonna have to spend a lot of time. I spend way more time with the founders that we invest in than probably the money would buy in terms of that. And so I genuinely want to get the intellectual stimulation and excitement excitement out of working with somebody, right? I don't want to be in a situation where I essentially end up, making an investment. It's cool, but I don't enjoy spending the time with the founders, so I dread getting on the phone with them, or I don't want to talk about that industry, things like that. And so that's really the things, people, the market, and then just, do I want to do this, right? And so far so good.
What about if you were giving advice to your younger brother or your younger sister who is like 25 years old, let's say, they've just started their first job a few years ago, they might have saved up a little bit of money, and you're saying, okay, you're not going to maybe be investing in early stage startups like me or high risk investments. Like, is there a basic thing that you would advise those people, especially given the current situation we're in?
Yeah, I basically say there's 4 things that are kind of the rules to wealth, right? The first is you got to make more money than you spend, right? Or spend less than you make. Second is that you've got to put yourself in a position where you've got multiple streams of income. The third is that you've got to get out of cash and into non-inflationary assets, right? So can you get into real estate, precious metals, Bitcoin? Somehow equities are serving right now as a kind of non-inflation type asset. And then lastly, you've got to be persistent and disciplined for a long period of time. So you got to set a plan, you got to stick to it, right? But if you can basically do those 4 things, you'll be in pretty good shape. And what a lot of people don't remember is like, that stuff's not hard to know. Like I just told you the 4 secrets, right? Doing it's the hard part. And so step 1 for most people is like, hey, stop spending so much money. Or what's actually probably usually easier is don't worry about spending less, worry about making more. Right. Yeah. I always have had this weird fascination with people who say, hey, I spend $3,000 a month, I should only spend $2,700 a month. Like, okay, so that's $300 difference a month, which means that you basically can get like $3,600 a year. Okay. Yeah. Could you just spend $3,000 a month and instead go make an extra $10K? Some people no. Sure. Like some people, like literally the answer is no, right? They are in a bad situation. It's hard. They've got a family, kids. Like I get it, right? There's not for everybody. But for the people who have the opportunity, is it easier for you to cut $300 out of your budget, or is it easier to go make $10K, right? By doing some kind of side, job or a hobby or whatever. For a lot of people that are trying to cut 10% of their budget, it'd be easier to go make $10K. And by the way, at the end of that, you're netting out more money, right? So you're doing the easier thing that also leads to a greater degree of income. And so I just think that we've told people save. And it's like, maybe, right? I actually think that's pretty bad advice for most people. Yeah. And so instead what we should do is we should focus people on don't be so constrictive in your thought process. Instead, be more expansive and go make more money, right? What can you do to make more money? And when you make more money, then you got to spend less than you make. Then you got to have those multiple streams of income. Then you go and you get out of cash into investments, right? And just do it for a long period of time. That's the secret, man. That's it.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree, man. I think there's a book which sounds super scammy, but it's actually really useful. I'll Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, I think his name is.
Yeah, I've never read it, but I've heard great things about this. Multiple people have told me about it.
I think you'd probably know the principles. It's basically what you said, those things, but and invest in index funds is essentially kind of the conclusion. But one of the things I like about him is he doesn't focus on what he would call the $4 questions. Should I have another latte at Starbucks? People make themselves feel bad about getting a coffee outside once in a while, rather than saying, okay, if I just literally did a side hustle, or I spent a couple $100s on learning a new skill, or even free on YouTube, I could make an extra few $100s a month, a few thousand a month, or even a lot more. So again, like you said, it's not for everyone, but I think that we're in an age where you can go out and do a lot of those things for a lot of people. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably one of those people. Of course, like you said, if you're in a war-torn country and you don't have access to the internet, this doesn't necessarily apply. But for most people, if you've got an iPhone in your pocket and you're listening to us two talk, you can go and open YouTube and learn how to do video editing and get paid by Pomp to do the podcast. So anyway, I think that's really helpful to go into. You also talked recently about digital art. I was really fascinated by this. So explain to me your thesis. Why are you investing in digital art? Why do you think there's so much upside there?
Yeah, so if you think of kind of traditional art, right? It's static, it's physical, and it sits on your wall, and the only way that it changes is if somebody goes and takes it off your wall and puts a different piece of art, served as awesome investment, right? I think there's this company, Masterworks, that advertised on the podcast. They told me that blue chip art has outperformed the S&P from 2000 to 2018 by 180%. Right? Again, that's the data they told me. I don't know how accurate it is, but if directionally that's correct, if investing in art is better than the stock market, that's interesting, right? And so when you look at that, you're like, okay, well, hold on a second. Digital art is a superior form of art than the analog version. So just like Bitcoin is a superior store of value to gold, the analog version of sound money principles, digital art is to analog art. And what I mean by that is now you put a screen on your wall. You can change out the art as much as you want. You could change it every minute. You could change it once an hour. You could change it, in the fall and spring. You could change it, every month. Just whenever you want, you can change out the art with a click of a button. So it's much easier. 2 is there can be motion and sound included along with the visual. So now you start to get into things you couldn't do, right? That the form factor changes what the type of art is. And then the third thing and the most important thing is you're absolutely breaking down the walls of the traditional art world, right? You're democratizing access to an asset class that previously was very, very hard. I tell people all the time, hey, if you want to buy a $10,000 piece of art, where do you go? And they just look at you blankly. What? I don't know. Do you go to the art store? Right? You're like, maybe, yeah, for sure. Right? Yeah. But how do you do that, right? Now, all of a sudden with digital art, there's literally a website and anyone in the world can bid on a piece of art, right? And can have it sent to them within minutes. And so what you're literally doing is you're bringing that digital nature, the things we know that work in the digital world, you're now bringing it to this new asset class, right? And to me, what's interesting about it is, 1, I like the art. And then 2 is if it has all these advantages structurally, then I want to be a part of it. And so we started to buy up digital art, came out and kind of said, hey, this is what we're doing. And I was shocked at how many people were just like, whoa, why would you do that? Right? And then they start to learn about it, wait a minute, this is actually pretty interesting. And now all of a sudden, I think more and more people are going to get into this. But that's just kind of our perspective on it. It's literally just art, but better.
I thought the same when I first saw it because I hadn't really thought enough about this. Then when I saw some of the numbers, I think there was something about, in Asia specifically, there's a huge percentage of younger people buying art, whereas in the Western world, a lot of it is kind of older people, traditionally speaking. Of course, we're going to get older as well, and things change for us as individuals. When Kindle came out, and there's always the adoption curve. There's innovators, early adopters, etc. And normally the people who want to get the first flat screen TV are willing to spend 5 Gs when it's going to be 500 in a few years' time. And when the Kindle came out and we compared it to books, there were some people like me who were like, oh, this is cool. I can download it in 30 seconds. But for a lot of people, they said, oh, it's not as romantic or as nice as touching a physical page. And the thing is, both of those things can be true. So I think the art side, I think, is very similar, where we traditionally think of this old school thing where people who are spending millions in art, they like seeing it in a painting in their house, or they want to, there's a sort of value to it as well in that world. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I think you definitely are onto something for sure, though.
Couldn't agree more. We're going to see what happens, but I think that we're going to end up being on the right side of history for that one.
A couple more things. So you also recently launched a rolling fund, I believe. Right.
I did.
So a lot of people might have heard of this term. I'd love for you just to quickly explain what the hell it is and what's different versus what you were doing previously.
Yeah, so traditional fund structure is kind of a GP-LP relationship. You go out, you fundraise for 6 months. LPs commit to your fund. You close fundraising, then you go invest the capital for call it 1.5 to 3 years, and then you go back out and fundraise again. So it's kind of this start-stop type mentality. What a rolling fund does is it basically flips that on its head. It creates a subscription model. So now people come in, they subscribe for a specific period of time. So let's say on a quarterly basis, I want to do $25,000, so $100K a year, and I'm going to keep doing that every single quarter until I don't want to do it anymore. And so think of it kind of like a Netflix subscription. You turn it on, when you're done, you shut it off, and that's how, from an LP perspective, it's much more superior. So I know when I'm going to get capital calls. I know exactly what the capital call is going to be every quarter from an amount standpoint, so it solves some of my pain points. And then I also get to kind of increase or stop my allocation based on what the GP is doing. So every quarter, I think of it as like a double opt-in. The GP says, yes, I want to take the capital this quarter, and so I'll issue the capital call. The LP says, yes, I want to fund it this quarter. I'm going to go ahead and give you the money. And so I think that's just a much better system for both parties. And ultimately what it does is it drives that the GP's got to do their job. Right? A lot of people don't like this because what happens is it puts them in a position where if the GP's not doing their job, the LP's not going to give them the money. And so what GPs have wanted in the past is commit to the capital now, and then for 3 years, I get all the money. Yeah. But in year one, if I do something that you don't like, then you can't pull your money. And so to me, it kind of keeps both sides honest here, which I think is not going to be a fan favorite in some of the investment community, but I do think is kind of a net positive for both parties over the long run.
And my understanding is that just doing this in the past without essentially software and AngelList, it seems like a kind of like this platform who have allowed this to happen essentially through software. Whereas in the past, if you were doing this every quarter, people can bring their money in and out. Like just if you went to a lawyer, the lawyer would say, hey, this is just too much work. Like it's going to cost you a lot of money to do that. Is that accurate? Or I'm just trying to figure out like, why wasn't this happening in the first place and what needed to change for it to be something viable now?
Yeah, I think it was just being able to build the software. That's the big thing. Yeah, the software. And now that we've got kind of software in place that AngelList built, and kind of Avlok Naval and the team there have done a fantastic job with just kind of solving all of these niche problems that come up, that I think that's really what was the impetus for kind of empowering this now.
We are going to wrap up soon. I just have a couple last questions to close us out here. So look, man, it looks like you're killing it. Like you've been investing, you've got money coming in from ads, money from Substack. I'm sure you could probably chill if you wanted to, but you're not. You're really motivated and you're killing it. And you and your wife seem to be building this kind of empire together, which is really cool to see. I guess the question is, like, if money was no obstacle, like, what would you spend your time doing right now?
I'm pretty much doing it, man.
Yeah.
Like I think that's what people don't realize is I'm doing this stuff because I like it, right? And I enjoy doing it. And, you know, again, if you take the podcast, for example, that Bryce and I announced today, everyone on the surface sees like, wait, why is this guy who from like the business tech world doing a podcast with a TikTok star? That seems like a really weird combination of people. Well, then when you see it, it's like, wait a second. These two guys are about to go out and we're going to try to make a dent in the lack of financial education in the world, right? And we're going to do it in a way where Bryce, as a representation of that kind of young adult, kind of demographic, he's making a lot of money, right? He's got a merchandise business he launched 4 months ago, making $1 million a quarter already. Like, kid's killing it, right?
Yeah.
But he also is smart enough to know, hey, wait a second, these influencers and these social media stars, they're the new athletes. 70% of athletes end up broke. He doesn't want to be like that, right? And so he's saying, hey, I got to get ahead of this. I got to figure out, while it's good, how do I invest my capital? How do I, not blow it on material possessions, all this kind of stuff? And so him and I can have those conversations, but also then we can bring in the Mark Cubans of the world and kind of these really, really successful investors and entrepreneurs. And yeah, it's cool. It's fun. We're joking around. We're having fun. But what we're hoping to do is educate an entire generation of kids on here's how you should have a relationship with money and here's how you can build generational wealth. And so to me, like, I enjoy doing this stuff because it's fun to have the conversations and joke around and kind of, basically, as I tell Plin all the time, like, screw around on the internet. But ultimately what I think is end up happening or kind of the net positive impact that we're having is worth all the effort. And so that's why I keep doing it. And, I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
That's awesome. I love the answer, man. Yeah, I think like one of the things I say to my girlfriend as well is like there's two types of tired at the end of the day. It's like sometimes I'll, like in my old job, like a few jobs ago, I would often come home and I'm like stressed and tired and I've just been doing like busy work all day and your body's just tired, your mind's tired, you just want to fall asleep or watch some mindless TV. But nowadays I'm like kind of like tired, but kind of like when you go to the gym and you do like a deadlift and your whole body is aching and it's like in pain, but it's like a nice productive feeling. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I always say like I want my mind to feel like it did a deadlift, and having these sort of conversations really does that for me as well. So
this is cool the way it works, man. This is the way it works, right?
For sure, dude. So the last couple things for us to close out is this sounds a little serious, but I'd love to just ask you this. Like, you seem like quite an upbeat person and really motivated and things are going well. You've also been in war and you've been in the army and like you've had like crazy experiences which we haven't even been able to touch on today. Like, I'm curious, like, when was the last time you mentally felt down, man? Because it's something that from the outside you don't really see it, and it's really important to kind of discuss sometimes that like you have your down days too, I'm sure. So if you're able to share that.
Yeah, I think that I'm like everybody, right? Like, there's days where I don't feel as hot as other days, but the thing for me is, when I was 20 years old, like you mentioned, I went to war in Iraq, and basically was like a young, kind of wide-eyed, naive guy that they handed a gun to, and they were like, go off, see ya. And being there, you just get exposed to things where you're like, hey, newsflash for anyone who didn't know, we're all gonna die. Every single one of us is going to die. And like, that scares the shit out of some people. And for other people, what it does is it focuses them. Like, just enjoy the life that you're living. Right. And I think that when you have that perspective, what you end up realizing is like, I wake up every single day and I do the things I want to do because I'm having fun. Right. And that ultimately is like what I'm optimizing for. I'm optimizing to be happy. And I think that when people kind of have that context of what am I going to do today? I want it to be something that makes me happy. Changes the game. And so I was very lucky to have that experience at kind of 20, 21 years old. And so I've been able to kind of capitalize on that since. And I think that's where people are like, oh, you're so excited. You got all this energy. It's like, yeah, man, like, are you kidding me? Like, look what I get to do every day. This is a joke in terms of having a life like this. So like, I can't complain.
Yeah, man. Well, I think that's the best way to close out, man. Thanks for sharing all of your stuff today. We'd love to do this again. I think we definitely need to meet up when we get a chance.
Let's do it. I'm down.
Yeah. And the last thing, where can we send people? I guess obviously the Pomp podcast, pompletter.com for the email.
Yeah, just pompletter.com, or go find me on Twitter. As I said, I tweet everything. So if I got something going on, you'll know about it there.
All right, man. Well, thanks for doing this, and I'd love to stay in touch, and I'll speak to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.